Mahatma Gandhi, though a devout Hindu, was widely known to admire Jesus. Gandhi often quoted the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, once, when the missionary E. Stanley Jones met with Gandhi, he asked him, "Mr. Gandhi, though you quote the words of Christ often, why is it that you appear to so adamantly reject becoming his follower?" Gandhi replied, "Oh, I don't reject your Christ. I love your Christ. It's just that so many of you Christians are so unlike your Christ." Well, that's a powerful thought with which we begin to explore what it is we believe about the church, an institution that is supposed to embody the dynamic, life-changing message of the gospel, but so very often switches allegiances to embody all the things that Jesus preached against. You know the stories, from abuse of power to racism. The church, that organized institution of faith, has for 2,000 years struggled to express the teachings of Jesus and very often failed miserably. So why have a church at all? Why not be followers of Jesus on our own? If we could swing it, it might be a little less messy. No long business meetings or labor discussions about building repairs, no usher duty or choir practice. Yet even in something as fundamental as the Apostles' Creed, we see the writers thought the church was worth a mention in this definitive statement of Christian doctrine, passed down for century after century, landing here for our consideration. The Creed says, "I believe in the Holy Catholic Church." There it is, right there. Right after all those definitive statements about God, since the writers of the Creed felt it necessary to include a statement on the church, and since here we sit, almost 2,000 years after the Creed was written in a church, it might be worth our time to take a little closer look. We begin this morning at the very beginning, right when the church was being born, before it was even called a church or before the concept of church existed at all. Most scholars think that the Gospel of Matthew was the earliest of the Gospels, written somewhere between 50 and 70 AD. As the writer of Matthew was sitting down to record his memories of life with Jesus, the little community of believers that had formed, the church, you could call it, was in deep trouble. They had had a few years of experimental living as followers of Jesus, and the ways in which they insisted on living were flying in the face of society around them. Jesus had taught them, for example, that a gospel community was a group in which every person was seen as equal in the eyes of God. But the society around them was strongly committed to the order of the empire, which subjugated women and promoted slavery, among other things. When a little group of Christians created a community in which women and slaves and people from other countries all gathered together to make decisions jointly and to support and lead the community, well, they were living in diametrical opposition to the order of the empire. As the message caught on and the little group began to grow, their strange and seemingly chaotic way of living in community, the church, started to feel threatening to the empire around them. The end result was what Matthew was addressing in today's gospel passage as he recalled the words of Jesus. Remember what Jesus said? Matthew reminded the church, living a radical gospel life, living in the community of what the church should be, well, it's going to make some people nervous. In fact, it's going to make some people mad. Matthew's community was living with the reality of Jesus' predictions because they called themselves Christians. Many of them had been disowned by their families. They had lost jobs and social status. They had been ostracized in their communities. And now, by the time Matthew was writing, things were getting dire and dangerous. Being a Christian meant you might very well end up facing a hungry lion in the Colosseum, turned into government leaders by people you knew and loved, neighbors, friends, colleagues, even your own family members. And this precisely is why the church was so important. You make a choice to follow this Jesus, to live in constant and stark opposition to everything acceptable around you, well, then you better not be doing that all alone. Nobody, you see, can live a life that is radically different from the world around them all by themselves. In October of 2003, the story of Timothy Treadwell hit the news. Timothy was at the end of his 13th season of living almost constantly alone in Katmai National Park, Alaska. He tried his hand at becoming an actor and kept running into dead ends, but somehow discovered this passion he had for wild bears. He determined that he would go and live among them, sort of Jane Goodall style, and to the dismay of many bear and wilderness experts, that's exactly what he did. Bears are dangerous. For bears and humans to live together without one hurting the other, there are specific rules and standards to follow. Namely, it's never a good idea to settle down in the middle of bear territory all by yourself. Timothy Treadwell refused to heed these warnings, repeatedly passed on to him by scientists and park rangers. He preferred instead to live all alone in one of the harshest environments on the planet, right in the middle of the most densely populated bear sanctuary in existence. That last season, 2003, Timothy had spent the summer in Katmai with the bears and just one other person, his girlfriend. The day they were packing up to leave for the season, they were both attacked and killed by a bear. It's a sad story, and though many have investigated, no one can seem to figure out why it is that Timothy Treadwell threw all caution to the wind, didn't keep pepper spray around anymore, dismantled his electric fence, and most of all, insisted on heading out to the wilderness all alone. See, there's such irony in this story. Had Timothy joined forces with the community of folks in Katmai who loved the bears and who were committed to studying and protecting them, it's very likely that he would still be alive, along with his girlfriend and the bears that attacked him. It's a pretty dramatic story and illustrates this profound truth. When you're determined to live your life in a way that challenges the status quo, you best not be doing it all alone. We believe in the Holy Catholic Church because we need each other. If there's any way on earth we're going to manage to live the radical gospel message in any way that is even remotely authentic, we need each other. The very first church knew this. They knew their choice to live intentionally as followers of Jesus could cause some concern for those around them, even their families. And by the time Matthew was writing, they knew that following Jesus could be a matter of life and death. And most of all, they knew there was no way they could do it alone. So, having established a need for a community to surround us in our quest for gospel living, it's interesting to note that the Apostles' Creed describes this community with two adjectives, holy and Catholic. Frankly, I don't know which one worries me more. We're committed to our need for a community to surround us and to encourage us in our efforts to live out the gospel message, but isn't it asking way too much to create and maintain a community that's holy and Catholic? I mean, what does it mean to be holy? The perception of the church and of church people as holy is frankly not something that is helping our cause. Do you know how intimidating it is to step through the doors of a church, especially if you haven't been there in a while? It's considerably intimidating. No, that's not the kind of holy we believe the church is called to be. Instead, we want to be holy in a way that means different. No matter how many times the organized church has given into the temptation of human institutional corruption, no matter how many instances we've seen of the church letting us down, and no matter how often the church has been the very perpetrator of grave ills, what we believe is that we are called to be different, to be holy, to live in community in such a way that the world can see how different we are and can catch a glimpse, even if it's just an occasional glimpse, of the dream of the gospel. And we also believe we're supposed to be Catholic. The writers of the Apostles' Creed are not referring to the Roman Catholic Church, but rather the Catholic Church as in the universal church. All of the people who claim to be followers of Jesus are part of this group we're referencing when we say the Apostles' Creed. Everyone, even the weirder fringes of the Christian family. And one of the key characteristics of this gospel community we say we believe in is that it's Catholic, that the doors swing wide to welcome anyone who claims to be a follower of Jesus. Anyone. According to the World Christian Encyclopedia 2001 edition, there are over 33,000 Christian denominations in 238 countries around the world. That's a far cry from unanimous consensus. But an interesting trend is occurring. Experts who study church growth are fascinated by the fact that while denominations are an expression of socially acceptable faith over which we feel compelled to argue the details, recent trends show that people don't care much about denominations anymore. I think this trend is a signal that we're moving back toward the first expression of the church that Matthew addresses when he writes down Jesus' words about the challenges of following him. See, it's just not commonly expected anymore that everyone goes to church or even calls themselves a Christian. It's getting to the point, even in American society and certainly in other parts of the world, that if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you have a specific choice to make. And as that choice becomes more and more strange to the world around you, the fact is you're going to need a community of folks walking alongside you, a community that understands the challenges of living in an alternative way to the rest of the world. It seems there's a whole lot to think about packed into 7 little words. I believe in the Holy Catholic Church. And it's a rather bold and courageous statement to say them. What you and I mean when we say them is that we believe in the dream that Jesus had, a dream that somehow the principles of the gospel message would become so deeply implanted in your life and in mine that we would be able to live lives exemplifying a radically different community standing in stark contrast to the communities of the world. Martin Luther King Jr. called this dream the beloved community. He said the church is the community of those of us who try our very best to know, proclaim, and live out the gospel news that love is the power through which we are created and sustained, and reconciliation is God's best dream for our world. We've seen this dream made flesh in Jesus Christ, and once in a while, we can see sparks of it right here and now among us, within this very beloved community, the church. We're grateful for these glimpses of the divine, and for more of them we pray with hope and expectation. Amen.